And so, good evening, Happy New Year. We're in 2022, and we're going to be in Revelation 13 tonight. So we're going to jump right in. I'm going to share the screen, and we'll get into this passage that's kind of difficult, kind of tricky to understand and to walk through. So let me see if I can resize my screen a little bit so that it's a little more legible. Okay, I think that might work. So I can pull that out there. Okay, so we're going to walk through the last what was it, the last month in December. We went through Daniel 7, and we were looking at another look of this beast from the sea from Daniel 7's perspective. So we're going to go ahead and go into Revelation 13, and we're going to look at the beast and kind of walk through this. And if we need to, we'll stop and go through and make sure that it's understandable. Okay, so we'll start in verse 1. John writes, "Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name." Okay, so based in what we've studied, we look at the beast, and he's rising up out of the sea. Now, I mentioned this on Sunday that this rising up out of the sea can mean a couple of things. Doesn't necessarily mean it specifically, but it certainly points to it. The fact that he's rising out of the sea points to the fact that he's rising out of the sea of humanity. And given the Jews' viewpoint of the sea representing a form of chaos and confusion, and that was very similar to how they perceived and understood the Gentile world, it's very likely that this individual could be a Gentile. And that certainly falls within the realm of possibility when we get to the end times. So we see this beast rising up out of the sea, likely a Gentile. Now, here we go into the issues of the 7 heads and the 10 horns and the 10 crowns. And we talked about the 7 heads as being 7 kingdoms. We talked about the 10 horns as being 10 kings. And what we got that from, we find that this phrase right here, the 7 heads and 10 horns, we find a similar passage over in Revelation 17. So we'll go over to Revelation 17. If you're looking on the screen, I've got this here, and we're going to go down to verse 7. Just to kind of give us a little bit of runway here, Revelation 17 and verse 7. And we're going to try to see how Revelation 17, this passage here, connects with Revelation 13:1. And we see that this is referring to the one and the same person. Okay. The angel said to me, "Why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast which carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns." Now, here's where we get to it in verse 8. The beast that you saw was and is not and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and is going to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. Now, that's a mouthful, isn't it? Verses 7 and 8. Okay, but what I want you to see here, and we'll go back and we're going to look at this, we'll run through it again. But I want you to see that this beast that's mentioned in Revelation 17, and if you want to see the background, you can go back and read the first part of the chapter, verses 1 through 6, and you can see that there is a scarlet woman, and she's riding on this beast, and this beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay, so we get more detailed description beginning in verse 9, where the angel says, here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Okay, now, when you go back and you try to do the study and you see the different opinions on what the 7 mountains point to, the majority, be honest, the majority of commentators believe that refers to Rome, that this beast is referring to some sort of a revived Roman Empire. However, something that I read from one individual, one commentator, really turned the tables for me, and he rejects that notion. And the reason he does is that the word mountains is used here, and Rome can hardly, the hills that are around Rome can hardly be called mountains. They're more like rolling hills. They're not that big. They're not that large. Moreover, this commentator pointed out that when you go back and you read this in light of the rest of Scripture, there are many instances where a mountain is connected to a kingdom, to a reign, to a ruling. So we're talking about a king and a kingdom. So if the 7 heads then are 7 kingdoms, then what that means is that these are 7 kingdoms. These 7 mountains point to 7 different kingdoms, not just one. So I don't think that it really points to some sort of a revived Roman Empire, but rather I think it points to, if you just let the passage continue to teach and continue to go, it starts to make more sense. Okay, so let's keep going with this. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. So you see a connection with the 7 kings and the 7 mountains. They're tied together. Now notice what he says here in verse 10. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. Okay, so 5 have fallen. These 7 kings, 7 kingdoms have already come and gone. And so that's pointing to the empires of Egypt, of Assyria, of Babylon, of Media, Persia, and Greece. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They have fallen. They've come and they've gone. And then he says 1 is. Well, that would point to Rome, because that would be the kingdom, the empire that was in place when John wrote this. And then notice the 1 has not yet come. And so that has to be pointing to this kingdom that is going to be established during the 7 years of tribulation, that this beast from the sea is going to rise up and be instrumental in doing. And how that fits, all we have to do is just read a little bit further and we can see a little bit of confirmation with that. And it says, okay, after verse 10, when he comes, he must continue a short time. Again, referring to the seventh kingdom, the 7th empire. Now notice verse 11, the beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th and is of the 7th. Okay, so this points to this new world government that's going to rise up, that this character, this individual that's mentioned in Revelation 13 is going to be instrumental in putting together. It seems like that there's going to be some sort of a 10 kingdom world alliance that will bring the leadership and the government and the militaries of the world all together. And that's going to be the 7th of this kingdom. And then it says the beast is the 8th and is also of the 7th. So this fits in with the timeline of the Great Tribulation. The last 3.5 years, this beast from the sea is going to be the world ruler, the world dictator, and everybody's going to have to follow him and worship him and all the rest. So that's what this seems to be connecting and referring to. So that's the 7 again, the seven kings, the seven heads, and then you see the 10 horns. Notice in verse 12, the 10 horns, which you saw, are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. So you get this idea of 1 hour being a very short period of time, very unexpected short. They seem to have believed they were going to rule for some time, and then all of a sudden they're not ruling anymore. And that fits into this scenario of this government of 10 kings, this 10 kingdom alliance rising up along with this beast, and they rise up and form this world government, but their rule is cut short.
Wow.
Okay.
Too loud.
Too loud, no.
So that's what we're pointing to with this. Okay. Now, verse 13, follow along with this. These are of one mind. Speaking about the 10 horns, the 10 kings. They're of one mind, they're of one mindset, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. So they realize that this guy is the world leader, and we're going to talk about why they see this and why they believe it, why they're convinced and persuaded, but they give their power over to him. And that kind of fits, doesn't it, with the description that we had back in Revelation 6, the rider on the white horse. Remember, he had a bow, but he had no arrows. Remember, he had a crown, but the crown was given to him. He didn't have to take it. All kind of fits in. Okay, so these are of one mind. They give their power and authority to the beast. Now, notice what they do in verse 14. These will make war with the Lamb. So where does that happen? Well, that's going to happen in Armageddon. That's going to happen at the glorious appearing when Jesus comes down on the white horse. They're going to be the ones making war. Okay, so putting those two together, 7 heads, 10 horns, and on the 10 horns, 10 crowns. Is that starting to make sense? What doesn't make sense? What gaps do you have that maybe we can go back and refill? Jim, I might need to. I had to mute you, Jim. You may need to push and unmute. There you go. So any questions, any comments, anything not make sense?
I've got a question.
Okay.
In my version, which is an NIV, it says 7 hills.
Okay.
So why is you're going with mountains and that there's no mountains in Rome, but this version says hills. I'm questioning and
yeah,
I don't get it.
yeah, the word in the Greek language is typically translated as mountain. And so I kind of push back on the NIV's translation of that, just simply because, well, it would seem to fit. It's almost as if the editors said, well, this has to be referring to the Roman Empire, but Rome doesn't have mountains, so this must mean hills. And so Horos must mean hills in this case. But it's better translated mountains, in my opinion.
Okay.
And so again, it's something to remember, Judy. My take on this is not where a lot of commentators are. A lot of commentators just automatically say this is the revived Roman Empire. This is referring to Rome. But my problem with that is that there's a lot of other things that you have to fit together in order for Rome to fit all of the descriptions that you see in chapter 13 and 16 and 17 and 18. It's a tough fit for me. I'm not quite there yet. Not that, this is a hill I'm going to die on, but I am not convinced at this point that that's referring to Rome. And I think the better translation then would be mountains here. Okay, Susie, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. It's not a hill for you to die on.
Yeah, I meant to do that. Yeah, you get comedy for free in here.
I got a chuckle out of that too.
Yeah.
Okay, Susie, back to you. Go ahead and unmute. Still muted.
He went to go throw away books
at his office.
Oh,
He went early to do
Okay.
the
see, I see.
Okay. Got to mute there too. All right. Well, once you unmute, Susie, go ahead and ask your question. Anyone else?
As it relates to those translations, if I may veer just slightly,
Go ahead.
Hasn't NIV been translated kind of more as a paragraph at a time, if you will, as opposed to like each Greek word?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that may be helpful to understand a little bit, Judy, in the attempt. It's not so much that NIV is a bad translation, but there's a couple of, I guess I want to say, extreme when it comes to translating the Bible into English. There are those who want to keep the original form as much as possible. So what they're going to do, they're going to take the original languages and start to translate word for word, Greek to English, Hebrew to English, Aramaic to English. And so sometimes the reading in English gets to be a little clumsy. Some versions that are similar to that are King James, New King James, New American Standard, English Standard Version. Some of those they want to try to keep more in the form of the original language. There are others, though, that tend to look a little more on the content. So in other words, what they do is they read the sentence in the original language and they put it in more of a understandable kind of language in English. And so sometimes they'll use, you may find some extra words to clarify. They're trying to make it easier to read, easier to understand.
And your version is what?
Mine this is New King James. So I'm over here on the form side, and NIV is a little more probably in the middle between form and just complete, we're going to tell you the idea of what the passage means. Christian Standard Bible, Holman Christian Standard, NIV, they're kind of in the middle. And then over on the more of the content side, that would be New Living Translation. It would be God's Word. It would be Living Bible. Those kind of versions would be over there, where they're not concerned so much as to being word for word right out of the original language into English, but they're trying to convey ideas. They're trying to convey the concept or the content. So it's called the big technical term is it's the dynamic equivalent. So NIV is kind of in the middle, and that's kind of what Angie's pointing to, is that it's not so much that they're off base, but their approach and what they're trying to accomplish in their translation is a little bit different. So that's kind of why when I do studies and when I lead studies and preach, I've just gone back and I've just used King James, New King James. It just stays in my view, it stays closer to the original language.
And
Oh.
and we learned that, Judy, when we did a Know Your Bible thing, and that can just be a little plug for your Know Your Bible recordings.
Oh, and that's on the YouTube page too, by the way. There's another
Yeah.
shameless plug. So you can go onto the church YouTube page and you can pull that down and find that. All right, looks like Susie's unmuted. She's still got her hand up. Hi,
Sorry
Susie.
about
That's okay.
that. I almost missed you. I calculated the time difference wrong. Anyway, back there when I was talking about the 7 mountains and then it talks about a woman. Who
Yes.
do we say? Who's the woman?
Well, I'll give you the short answer. It is going to be the false religion that is going to be prevalent in the end days. There's going to be, before the worship of the beast, that's pointing to a kind of a mixture of all of the world false religions. And it's all going to be a big blend, a big hodgepodge. And so, you know, we can go into a lot of detail with that, and that's a big study, but that's the short answer.
Okay. All right.
Okay. All right. Well, let's keep going. Well, I'm back in chapter 13. We've looked at verse 1. Now let's get to verse 2. It says, the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. So if you remember back in Daniel 7, remember Daniel saw those the visions, and he had the vision of the lion, and then he had the vision of the bear, and he had the vision of the leopard. And remember what Gabriel told him that those represented. The lion represented Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar. The bear represented the Medo-Persian Empire. The leopard represented Greece. And you remember that? Well, what this is pointing to then is that all of the strong qualities of those empires, the majesty, the pomp that was found in Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar, the tenacity and the ruthlessness of the bear, the swiftness and the rapid rise and expansion that brought about by the leopard, all of those features are going to be a part, all of those qualities are going to be found in this individual. He's going to possess all of these. That's what this is pointing, what this is saying. So notice then that this individual gets everything he has from the dragon. He gets his power, he gets his throne, and he gets great authority from the dragon. Now, what we're going to see in chapter 13 is that Satan is beginning in this. He is forming his own trinity. He's going to form his own trinity. Dragon, beast from the sea, beast from the land. And we're going to see that here in chapter 13. And he is going to succeed with this, and he is going to dominate the world with this. And I found it fascinating that he accomplishes this, but then I also see the kink in the armor, that again, Satan cannot create anything. He can only copy, he can only duplicate. He doesn't have any original thoughts. He doesn't have anything original. He has to copy what the Creator has already done. So he gets now so therefore he gets his power, he gets his throne, his rule, his reign, and his authority all from the dragon. Now, how did the dragon have all of this? And this is kind of key to understanding this and why this is such a, I guess it's in a way, it's a big encouragement. How did the dragon get this power, throne, and great authority to give to this beast of the sea?
I just think he took the power and made it his power. Because God was letting him gather all these people together. In other words, I think Jesus was using him.
Okay, all right.
Putting them all these people together, and hopefully one world. And then when he was captured and thrown in the pit, Jesus had all these people in one group to preach to.
Well,
this was the last of the Gentiles, I believe.
Well, you get back to it. You hit it just right, Jim. He gets this because God permits it. He has this power, he has this authority because God permits it. Because Satan cannot take anything from God that God doesn't allow him to have. Nowhere else in scripture do you see Satan take anything. He's always allowed it. He's always given permission. And so now you're seeing God give Satan almost free reign. Do your worst. Go ahead. Give it your best shot. Go ahead and do what you got to do to make yourself to be God. Do whatever it is you have to do. And so what does he do? He rises up, he selects this individual and makes him this great ruler. Gives him his power, gives him his throne, gives him his authority. So he's rising up in power, rising up in prominence. And it's interesting that God is just letting him go. And he's only doing it right now because it is in the last 7 years. We are in the last 7 years, and God now is putting the final judgment. He's putting the final touches on this, on his wrath, his judgment, and it's coming to an end. And what's so fascinating to me, to add to this, is that Satan isn't dumb. He can read. I'm sure he's read this. I'm sure he's read the book. I'm sure he knows what the book says his end is going to be, and yet he's still going to do it. You know, it just, the arrogance and the hubris and the pride, we can just never underestimate. It's just an incredible amount of arrogance that I'll show him. I'll make sure that none of that comes true. But it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But again, as we continue to read this in chapter 13, notice the copy, notice the duplication again and again and again. Verse 3, I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. So he's just copying again what God's already done. And so somehow he pulls this off. You know, this individual he's killed, he's assassinated, and then, but yet suddenly he's healed and raised back to life. So it's little wonder then for the rest of the verse, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. They were amazed. They were stunned. Well, of course they would be stunned. Nobody else has seen someone dead come back to life. And so he pulls it off, and he deceives the entire world. And to go ahead.
I find that interesting because what I'm seeing in these two places that we've been reading tonight is, like you say, he's not got the power to take anything or make someone do something, but he's continuing to use his power of deception.
Yeah. It's almost as if, you know, his secondary mission is to take as many people down with him as he can. It just seems to be the main objective here. I may be going down, but I'm going to take as many down with me as I can. And that's the only thing that seems to make sense with this.
Well, and like you said, copying, you know, I am God. I was killed and I'm back to life now. Look, don't you want to touch my scars?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot like that, huh? And so that kind of leads right into verse 4. So they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? Well, they're both a couple of rhetorical questions, because the answer is no. No one. No one's like the beast. No one can wage war against him. He is the most powerful individual on the face of the earth. But yet, notice what they did first. They worshiped the dragon. Now, isn't that rather interesting? Because, you know, outside of Jesus, Satan never tries to invite anybody to come and worship him. And that's the only instance that I've seen in the Bible where Satan personally invites somebody to come and worship him. It's as if that's not the end game. But yet here he's given all of this authority to the beast and this power and all this amazing abilities and raising this guy back up to life. And he's focused there, but the worship is of the dragon. And it's interesting.
Well, no, Pastor, no one can see the dragon, which is Satan, but they can see the beast.
Yeah.
Which I call the Antichrist. You don't, but he's in charge of gathering everyone together to get power over the entire world, meaning Europe, and that's what his goal is.
Well, the connection then, since they don't see the dragon, that when they worship the beast, they are in fact worshiping the dragon.
Right.
Because it's the dragon who gave the authority to the beast. So it's interesting that that's the end with this, but there's this object of worship. So this, again, if you're looking at the 7-year tribulation timeline, it seems to be that at this halfway point, when the beast is killed and comes back to life, that now he becomes the object of worship. And remember, if you go back to Daniel 7, you go back to the prophecies of Daniel, that this individual will one day make his way into the most holy place, and he will set himself up to be God. He will put himself there. He'll put his image there. He'll say, I am the God that you're to worship. And anybody who doesn't worship me is subject to death. And so it seems that this is going to be happening maybe at the halfway point, the beginning of the Great Tribulation. Because now you start to see that this guy's not just being followed, but now he's being worshiped. And so that seems to coincide with all the other things that would be happening during the Great Tribulation. Okay, and that then also fits verse 5. When we look at verse 5, and he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And he was given the authority to continue for 42 months, 3.5 years. Okay, so again, this ties in, seems to be that when he's assassinated, he comes back to life, that's going to be about at the halfway point. And so now he's speaking all the blasphemies. And it's interesting that they use the word blaspheme, because the word blasphemy is more than just telling a bunch of lies, but it's actually saying in its context, he's saying things that are not true about God. He's saying things about himself that are reserved only for God. And so when we move into this context, this idea of blasphemy, it has in this context, this guy's is trying to set himself up and convince the world that he is the God of creation. And so he's given this authority, but he's only given the authority for 42 months. I'm so fascinated that, again, he's given this authority. He got the authority. All of his authority comes from the dragon, but notice the dragon has a time limit and he can't get past that time limit. There's only 42 months. You can't go back to the store and renew it. 42 months, the clock is ticking, and man, once it goes, you're done. Okay, everybody on board so far? Have I lost anybody? Have I lost everybody?
No.
So far, so good? Okay.
So this is the last half of the 7 years of tribulation.
Yeah, we are in the last part of it. It'll be the last three and a half years. Okay, so verse 6 now, he opens his mouth in blasphemy against God. So here again is this blasphemy. Notice the context. It's against God. It's against his name. It's against his tabernacle, which represents his presence, and those who dwell in heaven. So he is blasphemy. He is saying lies. He is saying falsehoods about all of the above. Namely, that he isn't God. Namely, all of the qualities that are attributed to God are really not there. They're not true. He's not all-knowing. He's not omnipresent. He's not all-powerful. He's not unchanging. You can go through the list. Every one of those, deny, deny, deny.
Interesting how it includes the saints in heaven already.
Yeah. And so that's kind of it's kind of a comfort in a way, because if that's going to happen in the worst of days, then when it happens today, when it's not the worst of days, we can still know that there's a fence around it, that the Lord is still there, that he's still got his restraining hand. He's still keeping track of everything and keeping everything under control, even though it seems like it's all spinning out of control. Because he hasn't taken his hand off completely even yet. And even when he lets Satan have free reign, his hand's still on it. You can only go this far, you can only do this, and you only got this much time.
I have a question. Well, about him coming back to life. Is there any significance in the parallel that Jesus died and came back to life, and we as saints believe that, and we believe, and he was here, we could see him, but he represented God, and it's sort of like a parallel, like maybe when he's blasphemy, the saints is saying something like, you believe in Jesus, your people up there, and because he died and he rose again, well, I did that, and I have a father, the dragon, someone you can't see, but when you worship me, you worship him. And when you worship Jesus, you worship God. So I was wondering if that is why God allowed him to die and then come back to life. So people's faith would have to be very strong, because now they're seeing something that happened that Jesus did that we believe. Does that make any sense what I'm saying?
It makes total sense. It makes total sense, and it falls exactly in line with what Satan is attempting to do. Because again, remember, he cannot create, he can only duplicate. And that's all he's doing, is that he's duplicating what God the Son did. He can't come up with it. He doesn't have an original thought. He can only duplicate. And so you've hit it right on, Deb. This whole scheme is to confuse and to blur the line between God the Son and God the Father, and those who believe because of the truth of that. And what I've just done, and who my Father is. And so, why believe him when I'm standing right here in front of you and you just saw it yourself? So that's exactly what's happening. And unfortunately, it says that majority of the world's gonna fall for this. But
because they don't know the word. If they knew the word, they would know that this was all prophesied.
Or they knew the word, but they rejected it. They were convinced that it's not really true and it's not really accurate, and so therefore you can reject it. It's not the case. Don't believe that book. Why don't you believe your eyes?
Yeah.
And he's copying it just enough. Like I would say that most people who've heard anything about the Bible have heard about how Christ died for us and rose again and had scars on his hands. But I find it kind of ironic because, he's just like, picture in your head the stance. So here's the beast. Look, put your things in my scars, putting his head at him. But our Jesus has his hands out for us, to see his scars.
Yep. And again, I'm holding up a bottle of water. It's pure water, but all it takes is one little drop of milk, and it's not pure water anymore. So that's essentially the plan. Just twist it just enough, and you can get everybody hooked, and they're going the wrong direction. So that's a great insight. The parallel is stark. It's glaring, isn't it? Really, really something. So now that he's got all this, now he can turn around and just crank out the lies, blaspheming God, blaspheming his, Jesus' death on the cross and his resurrection and all of these things. I mean, you can just see it, can't you? He can, I did all this. Look at me. I'm the one that did this, not him. This all was written about me, and if you tell a lie often enough, people will believe it. And so that's kind of the issue here. But he doesn't stop there. The goal is not to, let everybody believe what they want to believe and to each his own. It's everybody's got to conform or else. So we get to verse 7. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. So he is going to make war and he is going to overcome. So in this 3.5 years, it looks like he's just going to clean house. And that's why, if you go back to Matthew 24 and 25, when Jesus said, when you see the abomination that causes desolation standing in the temple where he ought not to be, as Daniel says, and let the reader beware, those of you who are in Judea, you better head to the hills. You better go hide, because you've never seen anything like this. And so this is what John is pointing out. He's going to make war with the saints. He's going to make war with believing Israel. He's going to win. So there are going to be a lot of martyred believers, to be certain. That's pretty sobering. Pretty sobering. That's why we're telling people, man, believe in Jesus right now so you don't have to go through this.
But that was all granted to him.
Yes. Now, isn't that, so you look at this and you see just, it was granted. So you got to keep going. Who did the granting? Who did the granting? Who did the granting? Ultimately, you come back to God. God granted this. So even though all of this is breaking loose all over the world, he's still going to turn it, make it right. He's still going to bring complete justice across the board. And it's not by accident that the very first two occupants of the lake of fire are this guy and the guy that we're going to start reading about in verse 11. They're the very first two occupants. So I guess their room is going to be ready first. All right.
Well, what we're reading about here is the unholy Trinity. And if we can see it that way, they're making war with the tribulation saints. And remember, there's all these Jews that never came to Jesus. They're trying to bring them in. They haven't come to Jesus yet. So there's going to be a big battle towards the end. Well,
a lot of them have. And if you go back and read chapter 7 and you read chapter 11, you see, remember those 144,000 evangelists, those witnesses, those are all Israelites. They are all gone all over the world. And you've got those two witnesses that are clearly Jewish that are in Jerusalem, and they're broadcasting, and people are coming. They're preaching the good news about Jesus. So there is quite a coming to Christ by believing Israel during this point. But
that's true.
But
do you believe that the 140,000 didn't convert everybody, though?
Oh no, I didn't. I didn't mean to imply that they did, but to say that the Jews haven't come to Christ at this point, I don't know that that's going to be exactly accurate, because while there's certainly going to be some that refuse to believe, believing Israel is still going to be in place. And a careful study of chapter 12 shows you that God's going to take care of them if they're obedient and they flee, like Jesus said. If they head to the hills, God's going to take care of them. He's going to protect them if they're obedient, if they're faithful. But that doesn't mean that they all will be. That's not a guarantee. But they're certainly coming to faith at this point. I think that's something that's pretty clear looking at this. But yeah, you're right. This is an unholy trinity, and we'll get to member number 3 starting in verse 11. But we were doing a closer look at number 2, and so we're gonna keep looking at this. So verse 8, and this is kind of, I think this is where we're going to park it for tonight. But notice in verse 8, all who dwell on the earth will worship him. And specifically, those whose names have not been written in the book of the life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. Okay, that's kind of a mouthful, isn't it? And so there's a phrase there that may not make sense in verse 8.
Yeah, true. Apparently, the scripture is saying that everyone was worshiping the beast.
Nope, that's it. It's a little bit clarified. You go through it. He clarifies it. All whose names have not been written in the book of life. If their names are not there, they are worshiping the beast.
Okay.
Okay.
So that separates them. Yeah.
That separates them. So, and so the big issue is the word slain, or actually from the foundation of the world. Now, does the phrase foundation, from the foundation of the world, is it connected to slain, or is it connected to those whose names have not been written in the book of life? Because the grammar, as I've looked at this, there are some commentators that want to take from the foundation of the world and point it to whose names have not been written in the book of life, from the foundation of the world. So in other words, God wrote the book of life, all the names in the book of life, and their names aren't there, so they're automatically going to be worshiping the beast. Others, though, will say the word slain is connected to the foundation of the world, pointing to Jesus' death on the cross. So which one is it? And I'll tell you where I lean with this, and I think it's a pretty good statement. I think it fits better with the word slain, and I think it fits better with the death of Christ on the cross. And here's why. Even though that happened relatively recently, for us it's 2,000 years ago. For John, it was 70 years ago. When he wrote this. So obviously that wasn't at the foundation of the world, but the blood that Jesus shed, his death covered the sin of the world. Remember what John the Baptist said about it in John 1:29, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And so to take away the sin of the world, that's taking away the sin of the world from Adam to the last man standing. So all of it has been taken away. So from that vantage point, Jesus' death was a timeless event. It stands outside of time, even though it occurred in a specific point of time, if that makes sense. Because his blood covers all the sin backwards, back in time to Adam, and it covers the sin going forward all the way to the last person that's living on earth. So his blood covers that. And so at that point, then that fits better with the idea of foundation of the world.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that's clear.
Okay.
But first reading, you don't get that point.
It's a little tricky to pick out. And that, I'm not gonna lie, it took me about a good hour of studying and reading on that to get to that point. It's not something that you just come upon real easily. Sometimes you got to wrestle with it, but that's the wrestling I did with it, and that's kind of where I've landed. So, but if somebody can show me some compelling evidence to the contrary, that it's pointed to the foundation of, the names being written in the book of life, certainly God has foreknowledge and he knows who's going to believe, but still at the same point, that option is open, that invitation is open for people to believe. The ball is in their court. And so that doesn't dismiss or in any way reduce their freedom to choose and their free will. Susie, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, just remind me again. We're saying there are 2 books, right? There's the book of life, which is that's the book of believers.
Yes.
Okay, and then the other book is for, remind me what the other book was.
Now,
Just-
just to clarify, are we talking about, are you talking about the great white throne in chapter 20, when everybody stands before the great white throne and books were open and then another book was open?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Then the books, there's more than one book. In fact, there's more than 2 books, apparently, because when you go back and read chapter 20, you'll see that books were opened and then another book was opened, which was the book of life. And so the books that were open appear to be the book of all the works, all the deeds of all the people who were standing in that line. And they were judged according to their works. So they're going to be rewarded for the good deeds. They'll be rewarded for the bad deeds. But the bad deeds are such that if you have bad deeds, here you're in danger of the lake of fire. And so there's one more book that is going to be the final arbiter of the lake of fire. And that is your name in that last book, the book of life? And when your name is not found written there, that's when you're thrown in the lake of fire. It's not they weren't thrown in when they were judged according to their works. It was only when the book of life was open and their name wasn't there that they were thrown into the lake of fire.
Okay, that's where I knew I was reading that there was more than one book, but I was ahead of myself here. Okay.
Yeah. And that's what John's thinking about. That's what he has in mind when he's writing this in verse 8. He's writing about that because he saw that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, good question.
Pastor, doesn't this relate, the book of life belongs to Jesus?
Yes.
And he was the one that was slain, and he was at the beginning. He was in the beginning.
Yes.
So I mean, this is all relating to Jesus, period.
Yes. Yes. It definitely does. That and again, it's John calls it the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. So it's all pointing to the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. All right. Any other questions on this?
Good.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop the share, get back to this screen, and I'm going to stop recording.